Hey guys, welcome back to our VCP 6.5 ICM hands-on training. This is lab 19 in our series. In this lab, we'll go ahead and explore and talk about VMware's vSphere HA, which is your high availability. So the whole idea behind the high availability is we can go ahead and group the multiple ESXi hosts together in a group, and we can create a cluster out of that group to really achieve a high availability for our virtual machine. So that'll be the whole idea behind creating a vSphere high availability cluster. These are the topics we'll go ahead and cover in this lab. We'll go ahead and create a vSphere HA cluster. Later on, we'll go ahead and add our previously installed ESXi host into this high availability cluster, and we will go ahead and run those two ESXi hosts in an HA mode. Then we'll go ahead and later on carry out some HA functionality testing. Then we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the resource usage around our HA cluster. We'll go ahead and talk about the high availability slot size, and at the same time we'll go ahead and test the admission control functionality on an HA controlled cluster. With that, let's go ahead and log into our vSphere web client. So I went ahead and logged into our vSphere web client. Creating a cluster is pretty easy. It doesn't involve a lot of the tasks. So now if you see, we have 3 individual hosts that we have been working pretty much throughout this series. Now we will go ahead and create a cluster. To create a cluster, if you recall, when we had created our data center, one of the tasks that says in the basic task, if you take a look, here it says create a cluster, or we can simply go ahead and right click, and that's another option. We can go ahead and say, hey, we want to create a new cluster. So let's go ahead and simply click on a new cluster, and we will go ahead and create a cluster. So in the new cluster page, there are a couple of options that are being presented. The first thing is obviously the name for the cluster. So let's go ahead and give it a name to this cluster. So I'll go ahead and call it my HA cluster. Any name that is desired, that's fine. On this page, there are a couple of the options which are available. The first option says DRS. So we will go ahead and talk about DRS in the next lab. And within the DRS, if I go ahead and expand, there are a couple of options. And one of the checkboxes is that do we want to turn on this option or not. So in this lab, we are working with HA. So we will go ahead and take a look at vSphere HA, and we'll just simply go ahead and select this box. So when we click on the turn on, we are indicating, okay, hey, we are interested in creating a vSphere HA cluster. So within the vSphere HA cluster, there are a couple of options that says host monitoring. And as you can see, once we selected the turn on, both of the host monitoring as well as the admission control checkboxes were also selected, and that's what we need. We will be doing the host monitoring as well as we'll be working with the admission control. So it's perfectly fine for us to have these two boxes checked. Now I can go ahead and collapse the vSphere HA. We don't have to select any other option on this page. We're not doing any vSAN, we are not doing any EVC. So the only thing, just simply go ahead and specify a name and check the option that says turn on vSphere HA. Now simply go ahead and hit OK, and that would go ahead and create a new cluster. And as you can see, the icon for your cluster that says my HA cluster. So now in this task, we just went ahead and created our first ESXi or the vSphere HA cluster. Now to really work or do anything within this cluster, we need to have some ESXi hosts which are participating in this cluster. So we can go ahead and simply add our ESXi host to form a cluster. So adding a host to the cluster is very simple. We can go to the HA cluster and we can do an add and host, or we can go ahead and simply do a drag and drop. So let me go ahead and drag and drop our host 44 to this newly created HA. So now if you take a look in a moment, this host will get moved to, now let me go ahead and do the same thing for the 45. Probably it's still trying to process, and as you can see, we are being presented with a warning. This host has nested resource pool. vSphere DRS is not enabled for cluster. Moving a host to the cluster will collapse all existing. So that's fine. We are okay to have our resource pool being collapsed. So just simply go ahead and hit yes here. And as you can see, both if I go ahead and minimize this, and within this cluster, now we have our two hosts, host 44, and there's a host 45. So adding a host to the cluster is pretty simple. But if at this stage, if I go back to my cluster and simply go to the monitor tab, within the monitor tab, now we have a couple of tabs, and one of the tab says vSphere HA. So we can simply go to the vSphere HA and we can go to the summary tab. Within the summary tab, there are a couple of information that we can go ahead and take a look here. These are the information related with our HA cluster. So right now in this, as you can see, the host not connected to master is 1. vSphere HA agent initializing, still it's trying to initialize. 2. Advanced runtime information, total memory is available is this much. Failover capacity in terms of the memory is 127.89 gig. Cluster total CPU, and we can take a look at some of the information here. Now let's go ahead and simply click onto the heartbeat tab or heartbeat option. On this one, we can take a look at the status of our data stores and see what's happening with the data stores. And in this case, right now, there are two data stores that we have been working with. Now, if we go back and take a look at the configuration issues, because if you noticed, when we moved these two hosts inside our cluster, we do see some kind of a warning. So we can go ahead and take a look that by simply going to the configuration issues, that is also under vSphere HA. So simply go ahead and click on configuration issues. Now on the configuration issues, on this side, it says, okay, hey, right now the host 45 is being designated at your master node and host 44 has been designated as your slave node, and there are some warnings available on this particular host. So if you go ahead and simply move over your mouse, or we can even go to the ESXi level, and on the summary, let me go back to the host and simply go to the summary. Now on the summary here, it says the host currently has no management network redundancy. Let's go ahead and verify for the 45 what is the message we see, and we do get to see the same message that says the host currently has no management network redundancy. The reason at this point our ESXi host has only a single management port, and that is the reason we see this warning that talks about the network redundancy. There's a good thing about the HA. We can still go ahead and work with the vSphere HA even if we have just only a single management port configured. But if you're working with the production or anything, I think it makes perfect sense to have a second management port for redundancy. And we can also go ahead and achieve that same thing in our lab. If you recall, we had worked in the previous lab when we worked with the IP storage as well as the vMotion. We had added a VM kernel port, so we can technically use that VM kernel port and configure that VM kernel port for the management support also. So let's go ahead and try doing that. So simply go to the 44. Let's go ahead and start with your host 44. We go under the configure tab. Under the configure tab, if we go to the VM kernel. Now on the VM kernel, this was the VM kernel that we had created, VMK1. Now simply go ahead and added this VM kernel 1, and we will go ahead and enable this VM kernel for the management also. Now let's go ahead and select the management here and simply go ahead and hit OK. Now let's go ahead and repeat the same process for our second host 2. So let's go to 45. We go ahead and repeat the same process. Click on the VMK1 and do the edit setting and go ahead and select the option for management and simply go ahead and hit OK. So at this stage, what we went ahead and did, we had enabled our second VM kernel also for the management support. We can simply go ahead and right click on one of our ESXi hosts, and within that right click ESXi on the properties this page, we have an option that says reconfigure for vSphere HA. So we just enable the secondary port, so we will go ahead and reconfigure our HA for it to take effect, or for it to realize, okay, now we have a secondary management also available on this particular host. So now let's just simply go ahead and click on this option, and as you can see, reconfigure vSphere HA host, the process has just been kicked. So we might have to refresh to get rid of this one. So now let's just simply go ahead and repeat this particular process on the other host also pretty quick. And then probably I'll go ahead and refresh the whole screen maybe if it's needed. So now let it go through, and at this stage, if we want, we can go ahead and again go to the cluster level, and at the cluster level we can go back to the monitor tab, and within the monitor tab again we can go ahead and take a look at the issues here, and on the issues we can take a look at, okay, are there any issues? So we can go ahead and simply click on all issues. So right now this message is there, so let me go ahead and refresh probably the whole screen. It will be a couple of seconds, and as you can see, there is no more warning on the host 44 is not. I forgot to right click on host 45 and reconfigure for vSphere HA. So now just simply go ahead and do that, and will be a couple of seconds again. If we need to monitor, we can go back to individual ESXi host and we can monitor that too. Now let's go ahead and wait maybe a couple seconds, or let's quickly verify in meanwhile that we did allow the management configuration on to our VM kernel port 1. So let me go ahead and simply do an edit here. Yes, we had configured, so it should be the message should be going in, and as you can see, we don't see this message anymore. This icon will just disappear in maybe a couple of seconds, and as you can see, the warning has been cleared from both our ESXi host. Now let's go ahead and really quickly test the vSphere HA functionality. But before we go ahead and test the functionality, let's go ahead and quickly take a look at some of the settings again. We go to the cluster, let's go back here pretty quick under the monitor tab. Under the monitor, we are under the vSphere HA. And if we come back to the summary tab, in the summary tab right now it shows for this cluster, the master node is 44 and host connected to the master is right now being 1. There is one virtual machine which is protected, and we can go ahead and read through some of the more information if we need to do that. If there are any configuration issues, again we can go ahead and take a look. This message will clear in a few seconds, so that's okay. Right now we don't see any issues anymore. So if you recall, the master is 44, so let's go and click on the host number 44, and on the host 44, if I go to the VMs tab, there are a couple of VMs on this particular host, and right now there is one VM which is powered on VM 3. If we had everything configured and if the HA is up and running fine, if this host reboots, we should be seeing that this virtual machine should get migrated to the other host and should be up and running. So that would be a quick testing for your HA. So to test the HA, just simply go ahead and right click on the host 44, and we will go ahead and simulate a kind of a power outage. That means the host will go under a reboot. So within the power option, we have a couple of options. One of the options that says a reboot. So we will go ahead and reboot our host 44. So let me go ahead and click on reboot, and now we are being asked to provide a reason. So we can go ahead and test anything that you can like. We'll say okay, hey, we are doing an HA testing. Once everything looks good, we can go and hit okay. When we go ahead and hit okay, we will go to the cluster quickly. We'll go to the monitors tab, and in the monitors we'll go to the task and events, and we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the events and see what's happening. So let me go ahead and quickly click on OK here and come back to the cluster, and within the cluster we will go to the monitor tab, and there is an option that says task and events, and let's go to the events in particular. So we should be seeing any kind of a high availability event showing up on the on this particular page, and all of these entries are sorted by time. So we should see the host failure should be detected here, and again we can go ahead and increase this one if you need to see some of the actions and see what's going on. And this is one of the way we can go ahead and monitor, and at the same time we can now go ahead and select the other host, and you can see there's a red icon that kind of shows up. If I come back to the host 45, and if you noticed, within a blink of a second, this VM3 just got appeared on our host 45, and thanks to vSphere HA, the virtual machine was successfully got relocated from our failed host, in this case 44, to the host 45. Now we can go back to the, and as you can see, we're going through. Now if you go back, and you can see the host is not responding right now. If we come to the my HA cluster, and if we come to the summary, it says host connection power state 44 vSphere HA status. So that means this host is no more reachable. And again we can go to the cluster level, we can go to the monitor tab, and within the monitor tab we can go back to the vSphere HA, and now we can see the master role was changed from the 44 to 45 right now, and you can see host not connected right now, it's being 1, and there is one failed host. So we can go ahead and take a look at some of these information. But if you take a note, the protected virtual machines are still 1, and as you can see, this virtual machine 3, which was earlier on host 44, got migrated to host 45. So that kind of indicates that our cluster configuration is good, and the VMs are being successfully getting migrated from the one host to the another host in case of a failure or any other thing pretty much. Now we can go ahead and monitor, and we can wait for our previously rebooted host to come back and take a look at some of the other things. While our first host is being rebooted, we can go ahead and verify our HA cluster usage. So if we go back again to the HA cluster, on the HA cluster, if we go back under the monitor tab, on the monitor tab again there are a couple of options. One of the options is resource reservation. If I go ahead and click on resource reservation, the first thing it says is CPU. So from the CPU we can go ahead and make a note of the Cluster total capacities right now shows 55.06 gigahertz. Reservation capacity is 97, and these are some of the details that we can go ahead and take a look at for our VMs. And right now, if you take a look on the VMs, we have not done any kind of a reservation for any of our VMs. So that's fine. Right now the reservation is kind of clearly 0 for our VM. Now same thing, we can go ahead and verify the memory information or memory usage are available on our cluster level. So simply go ahead and hit on memory, and as you can see, the cluster total capacity is 127 available right now. The reservation capacity is 238. And if we come back to the VMs, right now if you take a look, quickly look at the VM, we have not reserved any memory for our VMs. So while the first host is getting rebooted, I will wait for the first host to come back, and I will see you in the next episode of the series. But the next episode will be a continuation of the HA, and we will go ahead and do a couple more tasks related with the HA. We'll go ahead and explore the HA slot size, and we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the admission control properties of your HA. I will see you guys in the next lab.